So the new chapter of One Piece has just released. And honestly, if you don't want to get your heart ripped out of your chest, then you might want to skip this chapter. It takes a surprisingly dark and just really sad turn that could make it the literal saddest backstory we have ever gotten. But if you are prepared, please continue to watch, and as always, like and subscribe and stick to the end as we will go over discussions and theories. But before we get into the new chapter, we are going to briefly go over the last one. And it starts off with Kuma and Jinny living in the Sorbet Kingdom, with Kuma working as a pastor over the years. Everything is peaceful, and we learn about Kuma and Jinny's relationship until the king changed the laws regarding paying the heavenly tribute. They were imprisoned for fighting back, and they were eventually freed by Eva and Dragon, who invited them to join their freedom fighters group, which later became the Revolutionary Army. We learn that Dragon used to be a Marine, and 8 years later, whilst Jinny was working as an Eastern commander, Jinny was captured by an unknown assailant. This brings us to chapter 1098, called The Birth of Bonnie. It starts off at the headquarters of the Revolutionary Army, where we see the army struggling with the amount of work that they are dealing with. Backup is requested for the Toomey uprising in the South Blue, but Eva says that they have their hands full with Goa. Kuma declares that he'll go help with the South Blue case, and Eva tries to remind him not to be rash since he's been reckless ever since Jinny was kidnapped. He lands on the island to help the uprising, and the people there are surprised at his entrance, demanding his name. But Kuma doesn't answer, and with a dark look on his face, he is reminded of Jinny's capture, and we learn from an army member over a transponder snail that she caught the eye of a celestial dragon who took her onto a government ship in order to make her their bride. We move back to the Toomey Revolution, where we see rebels declare their victory and jump in joy over the fact that they are now free. Kuma keeps thinking back to the day she was captured, and as the words from the transponder snail plays in his head, we see the development of the Revolutionary Army worrying the Marines and becoming heroes for the people. Kuma calls Dragon and states that he's worn out and needs to come back by ship instead of using his power. And just before the scene ends, Kuma's thoughts are of the last words from the transponder snail ringing through his head, "We're sorry." We move forward in the flashback to around 2 years after Jinny's kidnapping, and we see a ship rolling through the fog. A baby's cry is heard, and a shaky voice says, "We're nearly there, Bonnie." At the headquarters, we find out that Jinny had contacted them through a snail, and Eva shouts for Kuma. Kuma, Dragon and Eva and other army members are gathered around listening to Jinny as she says she finally made it back to the surface. But we find out that she was thrown away after she got sick. Kuma questions her, but she calls it a stroke of luck, saying that she wanted to see everyone one last time and that this call will be their last goodbye. Eva screams, "What?" and Kuma shouts that he can be there in an instant and that he was afraid he'd never see her again. Jinny apologizes, saying that she's at death's door and is glad that they care about her but shouldn't come when she's in this state. She asks Dragon and Eva to take care of Kuma, saying that he has a big heart, but Kuma is already pushing past other revolutionaries, trying to get to the outside in order to teleport to see her, saying that there is only one place that she'd go. Jinny continues through the transponder snail as she wanted Kuma to know that she loves him, always has, and always will. But Kuma is already gone, unable to hear her last words as he lands near the church in the Sorbet Kingdom. He asks the people there Jinny's whereabouts, and they confirm she is in fact there, but that something happened when she was exposed to natural light. Her entire body turned blue in the sun and her skin hardened like stone. As Kuma looks on her broken and ruined body, he is reminded of her face, her smile, her laugh and her words. Picking up her body, he breaks down crying and holds her close. The old folks there said she exposed herself to the sun in order to cross the ocean to make it home and ensure her baby's safety. The baby starts to cry and Kuma looks at her before saying that Jinny can rest now, swearing he'll raise the child well. And the final shots of this scene is Kuma standing by Jinny's gravestone. We move back onto the church as the old folks aggressively try to teach Kuma how to raise a child. telling Kuma how to use a bottle and to make sure Jinny's cot is iron so that he doesn't roll over and squish her. They remark on Bonnie's appetite being similar to Jinny's, and Kuma lets out a tearful smile. A certain amount of time passes and we see Bonnie's first words to Kuma as he tears up while the old folk dance around her. More years pass with Kuma trying to balance working for the Revolutionary Army and caring for Bonnie. We even see him going up against a young Sabo, eventually leading to his enlistment. After this short montage, we return to the church where Kuma has boarded up all the windows. The two friends who eventually end up on Bonnie's crew asks Kuma what in the world is he doing, and with a desperate look on his face he asks the guys to close the door. And he points down to her face where we see a small blue stone underneath her eye. The two men say that it looks exactly like what Jinny had and rushes to call a doctor. The doctors take a look at Bonnie but are confused of what causes it and aren't familiar with this new affliction. We then switch to headquarters and see Kuma quitting the army. Eva is surprised that Bonnie contracted the same disease as Jinny, and Kuma says he has to stay by her side. Dragon says that he can use their connections to reach out for doctors all over the world in order to help her. The flashback jumps forward in time to 7 years before the present, so Bonnie is 5 years old. She chases a bunch of other kids, flipping them off as they tease her that she can't go outside. They call her a vampire and pretend to drive her away with a cross, but she just kicks them, making them run home. But while she stands at the doorway, Kuma rushes to her and grabs her hand, exclaiming she can't go outside and even standing at doorways could hurt her. He asks her not to joke about it and she obliges, and Kuma hugs her crying, calling her a good kid. Bonnie then says that the kids made fun of her face stones and that she didn't ask to get sick, but Kuma says that they are jewels and the kids are just jealous. This lifts Bonnie's mood and she smiles happily. Kuma then asks Bonnie where she would go if she wanted to go on a trip, and she replies that she'd go to the Sky Islands that she read about in a book. She also mentions that they are close to the sun and they might see Nika up there. Kuma immediately jumps up and does the dance alongside the drums. Kuma says that they can go there for her 20th birthday and asks where she'd want to go for her 19th, and Bonnie replies with the Fishman Island. The scene switches to Kuma and the doctor talking about Bonnie's medical condition. He reveals that the disease is called Sapphire Scale and is incurable. Kuma asks him to speak quieter, and in whispered voices the doctor states that the stones grow in sunlight, and even if exposure is prevented, it won't be long until the disease catches up with you. The doctor is blunt and expresses that Bonnie only has another 5 years at best, and it will be a miracle if she survives until her 10th birthday. Kuma is obviously shaken up and asks, almost to himself, that it will be over by her 10th birthday. Whilst Kuma thinks his horrible dilemma over, Bonnie surprises him, scaring Kuma into falling over. He says that he thought she was asleep, and Bonnie reveals that she heard everything, and that it will be over when she turns 10. As Kuma stutters as to not reveal too much, Bonnie pushes him, and Kuma eventually says her condition is going to continue. But Bonnie had clearly misunderstood the implication that it'll be over by her 10th birthday, and instead thinks the disease will be over and she'll be better by 10. Kuma, scared, doesn't correct her, and instead says of course she'll be cured when she turns 10. But 1 year later, the old folk burst into the church, shouting that the old king is back and ready for revenge, aiming to immediately cut down the country's dead weight by burning people in their homes. And the chapter ends with that cliffhanger. And if you weren't crying this chapter, then I don't know what will make you cry. This chapter hurts like a motherfucker. There are so many parts that solidify it as possibly the saddest backstory we've ever gotten, overtaking Robin, Law, and Senior Pink. And not just because of the backstory itself, but Kuma also never got a happy ending. Instead, he's now a husk of his former self, getting rid of his humanity for some yet unknown reason. But I'm not surprised after all he's been through. But there are a few things I want to talk about, especially the elephant in the room, the art of this chapter. And even on the cover page, there is a message on Brooks' pants from Oda himself apologizing for not meeting the deadline. It's not confirmed if it was health related or otherwise, and his editorial department gave the green light to release it anyway, so it seems to be okay. But I'm really hoping, and a lot of other fans are as well, that this doesn't start becoming a major problem down the line, since the art of his recent chapters has been diminishing in visual quality. And I want to make that distinction because while the art is down, the story is still 10 out of 10. But Oda should really take the breaks he needs to, since he is an extremely busy person. And he's known to be very particular about his work, so I'm not sure if he'll take on help to draw other than his assistants. But nevertheless, the art of this chapter doesn't take away the weight of the story and the sadness that Oda is trying to convey. Which is great, and I'm 100% sure that the chapter will be fixed when the volume is released. The biggest revelation in this chapter is why Jinny was captured, and it's revealed that she was captured purely for the whims of a celestial dragon, which just further cements my absolute hatred for them taking away Kuma's Jinny after putting him through hell. They are just the most horrible people, and I know that's the point, but I cannot wait until Luffy frees the world from the celestial dragons. I don't want to cry over chapters anymore. But there is great parallels to Sabaody when celestial dragons were first introduced, and the idea that they can take any woman they want planted in the story, which also coincided with Bonnie's first appearance, saving Zoro from the World Noble. It seems to be a coincidence, but I wouldn't be surprised if Oda foreshadowed it. But when it comes to the celestial dragons, we find out that she was only released after catching a horrible sickness that turns her skin into stones. And this disease is called Sapphire Scale. We don't know much about this affliction, only that it transforms the skin when exposed to sunlight and is incurable and fatal. I noticed that it's very similar to the Game of Thrones disease called Grayscale, and I'm sure that played a big role in inspiring Oda. It has a very similar name and everything. But Dragon is now officially on Fraud Watch, letting his Eastern commander get kidnapped and horrifically tortured for 2 whole years. He pretty much did nothing while Kuma was seething in anger, and that's super disappointing. I hope he actually gets off his ass and does his job. And since the disease has passed on to Bonnie, if he isn't able to help cure Bonnie's disease, then he is a fraud, I tell you. Well, considering Bonnie doesn't have the disease now, something must have cured her. Maybe it was her now confirmed devil fruit, the age fruit, that cured her. Maybe she stunted her growth or distorted her future so she never had it. Or even it could be the doctor's dragon mentioned. We'll have to find out when the flashback continues. But with her age now being confirmed to be a younger girl, it does put the timeline into question. And yes, I was right about it. There was too much evidence suggesting Bonnie wasn't the age she portrayed herself to be. And regarding the timeline, she is at most 12 years old if she was born recently before her and Jinny's release, considering how young she was then. Which puts a lot of weird sexual undertones into question, even the characters in the show and the way Oda drew her. I mean, you have now Marshall EDP Teach being weird around her. That man needs to go to jail. And I'm not even going to get started on Sanji.
She said she was 12!
But moving on, I wanted to say that I was wrong. Kuma is not Bonnie's biological dad. Instead, it's potentially a motherfucking celestial dragon. But Kuma is the dad who stepped up, and he's actually a really good one, immediately taking care of Bonnie after Jinny's death. And you can see his love for her when he calls her stones jewels after saying the kids are just jealous. Which is a perfect backstory to her name being Jewelry Bonnie. It's honestly great and masterful in storytelling that a name we've heard for almost a decade has such a deep history to it. Now, the final thing I wanted to talk about is the end of the chapter with the old Sorbet King returning and causing havoc. However, if you need reminding, Kuma is actually a former king of the Sorbet Kingdom, meaning that in the next chapter, we might see Kuma stepping up and finally defeating the horrible king before taking over Sorbet himself, which would just be so cool. Overall, this chapter is incredible and incredibly sad. Kuma holding Jinny in his arms while she died was just absolutely heartbreaking. I was almost tearing up whilst writing this script. It's just horrible. Genuinely, who knew that such a silly looking character from early in the show could have such an awful and terrible backstory? But that's the power of One Piece. It juxtaposes silly looking characters with intense motivations and gripping backstories that makes the character so much more compelling. But it's coming to the end of the video, and I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for watching. The support has been great from some commenters, and I'm really happy continuing doing YouTube. I've got a few creative non-chapter review videos in the works, so be sure to subscribe as I'll be finishing up and releasing them over the next few weeks. Thank you guys again for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Okay, see ya.